Hello, you are listening to Just Films and That. This is the podcast where we talk about those films we think might be underrated or underseen. I'm your host, Josh Hallam, I'm joined as ever by the wonderful Alice Oliver. This week, Alice chose the film and she chose BASEketball. So, let's see what we think. Alice. BASEketball. It's from 1998, so spoiler warnings if you've not seen it. So BASEketball, what is it about and why did you pick it?
Right, here we go.
I'm looking forward to the what's it about bit more than anything, to be honest.
Okay, well, I've done my best with this. So here's what I've come up with as an Alice Oliver summary of this film. So it's a wacky, absurd sport comedy film. So in the film, sport has lost its spirit and enjoyment due to capitalism and the quest for profits. But the spirit of athletic competition indeed was not dead. Its seed merely lay dormant in the dreams of the young. We cut to a few years later where Doug Reamer and Joe Cooper, played by Matt and Trey, are coming up with a new sport called BASEketball, which is a mashup of basketball and baseball. They want it to just be a place where anyone can play no matter who you are, and the aim is really to have fun. But it soon gets discovered by a wealthy businessman who thinks the sport needs to go national, and then the whole thing becomes about money, corruption, sport politics, and the sport basically becomes the thing that these guys were trying to avoid. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I know, man. Yeah, the last thing we wanted is what it became. So why did I pick it? So I reckon, Josh, that BASEketball...
Why?
Well, I'll tell you why. I'll let you in on this. So I think BASEketball is both underrated and underseen. Underseen because it is regarded as a financial failure.
Right.
It is also regarded as a critical flop. And I disagree with that second part. Can't disagree with the first part. If it's a financial failure, the numbers are there.
Literally can't disagree.
It's maths. It's maths. I can't disagree with maths. I've tried. But I reckon it's a bit underrated as well.
Okay.
So I saw this. You know my friend Kat, don't you?
Do.
So you met her at my wedding.
At your wedding.
So
give her a lift, if any as well.
Like growing up, she was like my bestest best friend in the world.
Shout out to Kat, Alice's best friend, bestest best friend in the world.
Oh, great gal.
Also, I believe training or is now a paramedic.
She is now a paramedic.
Respect
she
for that, do you know what I mean? That's wonderful.
I know.
I mean, you could get a real job like podcaster, Kat, but whatever.
Yeah. Maybe one day. So she was sort of quite responsible for a lot of my introduction to films, basically when we were growing up. One of them being The Replacements. She brought that into our lives, Josh. I know.
So it's her fault.
Best thing she ever did. But she also, I believe, introduced me to BASEketball. So I was a huge fan of South Park. I still am. Still try and catch up on it when I can. I remember, when we used to download music off the internet using, the Kazaa and the LimeWire and all that. I remember downloading all the songs to the South Park, the movie, and burning them onto a CD and then giving that to her. So, lot of love for a lot of the same films. But basically, she introduced me to BASEketball. I loved it. I thought it was great. Really enjoyed it. It's been on my list for a little while. And, as we do, had to go back, check the critical reception, what's going on. And I reckon, a little bit harsh for me.
Okay. So it's a double whammy. It's both. It's underrated and underseen.
It's a double whammy.
Well.
Indeed.
Well.
But I'm interested, Josh, to know, had you seen BASEketball before?
So I had not seen BASEketball before.
Okay, I didn't think you had.
I had heard of it.
If I remember rightly, Josh, you're not really a fan of South Park,
right. So let's get this out of the way. I was dreading this. Yeah. When we picked it, I was dreading it. I don't... So... I'll be sort of careful what I say here because I don't like to be someone who says this is rubbish, this is shit. And I'm not talking about the film.
Listen,
we'll go on to that.
Josh, come on. We done Ace Ventura when Nature Calls.
No, I'm not talking about the film. I'm not talking about the film.
This is your payback.
Okay, so I was dreading this, right? I don't like South Park. However, I can obviously appreciate how intelligent, how bold, how daring Trey Parker and Matt Stone are. They do satire really, really well. It's just that South Park itself isn't my cup of tea. I don't find it funny, but I can absolutely appreciate how good it is. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it can be that successful for that long and be rubbish. Do you know what I mean? I know that people might disagree with me. It's just not my sense of humour. I've tried to watch it a few times on the recommendation of multiple people, including you, and it's just not for me. But that doesn't.
Not for you.
So I did go into this a bit like, what am I going to make of this? Because at the same time, and this isn't one of those sort of film opinions that get you shot. I don't dislike Team America, but I don't think it's that good. I sort of.
Now
again,
there's a controversial opinion. Now, anyway,
I can appreciate
I love Team America.
No, I don't dislike Team America. I just don't think it's as funny as loads of people say it is. It wouldn't be.
Have you seen Book of Mormon?
No, I haven't. I would like to though.
Good.
Is it good? Is it?
It's good.
Yeah. So, like I say,
I love it.
I can appreciate Matt Stone and Trey Parker. It's just not my particular
For sure.
sort of cup of tea.
That's
but
cute.
comedy, everything has a place. Plenty of people don't like Chubby Brown or bluer comedians or whatever, but they got a place. It's subjective. That's the point, right? So no, I hadn't seen this before. So shall I go first or shall you?
I want you to go first because I don't think you liked it. Okay. So I'm really keen to hear what you thought, because cards on the table for me, I really enjoyed it, and I love pretty much everything about it. So that's my likes done. Let's move on. Not really. I've got tons. I've got tons written down, and I'll try and condense it. But I'm absolutely so fascinated to hear what you've got to say about this one. So general consensus first.
So obviously I was dreading it. I tried to go into it as best as I could, being like, but I've got to be objective. Watch it with a critical eye. And I think the reason we structure the podcast the way we structure it is so that we always try and find both sides of the argument where we can. And I'll be honest, Alice, I liked it.
Oh,
yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I did. I enjoyed it. It's not perfect. I
wasn't expecting that, guys.
It's not perfect, and I got thoughts as we always do. Yeah. But no, overall, I really enjoyed it. Love the concept. Particularly enjoyed the message around the corporatization, commercialization of sport. That's quite a big sort of thing that I do a lot of reading about. And I thought it was really, really funny. To be honest with you, I thought it was really, really funny.
I am so happy.
At first, I'd probably say the first 10 minutes, I was like, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And then as it gets going, I was like, oh no, actually. So at first I went into it, I think one of the reasons I went into it thinking it's entirely Trey Parker and Matt Stone. But actually, I believe the original idea is the director's, which is the guy, is it David Zucker behind Airplane and Naked Gun? So they had a big hand in it. They had a big hand in all the jokes and stuff, but the original idea, I believe, comes from him. So I don't know if that's got something to do with it, but, their fingerprints are all over this film, so it can't be denied. That was just an interesting thought that popped into my head. So overall, I really, really liked it. I thought it was actually a pretty good satire mixed with some really sort of traditional comedy elements. So if you like Airplane, or if you like Naked Gun, or even if you like something a little bit more lowbrow, like Not Another Teen Movie, you'll probably quite like this, because there's a lot of really silly visual jokes, prop jokes, daft jokes. There are some other
massive throbbing penis jokes.
I'm not, you'd have to be a real snob, I think, to not laugh at a good cop joke. Right? Loads of people like a good cop joke, but that, because it's just funny, isn't it? Like, it's just so daft as the idea that so there's a bit in it where like you see their knees and their dicks are like dragging on the floor, but then they really lean into the daftness of the joke. So yeah, but there's other visual gags, like there's a bit in it where the bad guy's listening to their conversation. When they walk over to him, he's got like a massive earpiece, and he says, "Sorry, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation." And that sort of stuff, that's like Marx Brothers stuff. That's like Charlie Chaplin stuff. That's like classic vaudevillian prop comedy. And I really, really enjoyed it. So I laughed a lot more than I thought I was gonna. Yeah, I definitely laughed a lot more. In some ways as well, I made a note here, and I want to get your thoughts on this. But there was some really modern jokes that felt really modern. So there's a bit in it where there's a plot where the sort of love interest, the female love interest, runs like a charity, doesn't she? For it never says terminally ill. It's kids, sick kids, dying kids, that sort of thing. It's the dream come true. That's what it's like. Make a wish.
So it's like make a wish. Yeah.
So she runs that charity, and there's a bit where they say something to her like it's about sick kids, isn't it? And she says we prefer to call them health challenged or survival impaired. And I was like, fucking hell, that's like that feels like it could have been written now. Like, and I'm not like a you can't say anything anymore. But in the terms of satire, that's the sort of thing that you'd see in like Charlie Brooker's stuff, or even someone like, if you think of Rosie, who we've had on the podcast, she's obviously a satirist, isn't she? And that almost sounds like one of her videos, that sort of thing, that idea of holding a mirror up and that sort of thing. So I thought that was really good. I mean, I laughed at so many of the daft jokes, the big dick joke, the couldn't hear joke. There's gag after gag after gag in this. I really enjoyed the bit at the end where they just kissed.
They snog.
And
I'd completely forgotten about that, Josh. I'd completely forgotten until it was when I saw them in their like Hawaiian get-up, and then Squeak is obviously in that pineapple suit, and I just remembered that. I was like, oh fuck, they snog.
But it's like just out of nowhere, and it feels very like classic comedy, or like something like Family Guy or South Park, I imagine, where just there's an awkward pause or something random happens like that, and you just go, oh my, like it just hits you with like a curveball you're not expecting. I like, I've already got into it now. I like the message. I might have talked about this before. I've definitely talked about it on other podcasts like Team of Our Lives and Top 10 of Anything and stuff like that. But so I'm a massive football fan. Soccer, if you're in the US, but I'm going to call it football because I'm British, don't you know? But there's a really good satire here about the commercialization of sport and the other darker side of sport, like mental health, like the fact that these athletes, whether they be male or female, are treated as products. And they're there to sell tickets and TV rights and all that sort of stuff. So that idea of like, there's a guy interviewing someone after a game, isn't he? And he starts talking about how dark his thoughts are, and then the guy just turns to the camera and starts talking about talking about what's coming up next or what else is happening. And I thought that was a really quite subtle but also quite funny way of poking fun at the commercialization of sport. And then other things like a lot of it's a bit US centric, because of I think it's prevalent worldwide, but the specific things they're pointing at, for example, the cheerleaders are, there's the odd team outside of the US that has that. But, for example, if you've not seen it, each game has cheerleaders, and as it goes on, they get more and more provocative, more and more sexual. They wear more and more revealing clothing,
eventually,
lingerie,
there are poles, aren't there? They are dancing on pole dancing poles, aren't they? Like, it just keeps getting pushed and pushed to the extreme.
And obviously the whole point is like, it's family entertainment. Like, well, it's not, is it? It's like it's a bit weird. So really enjoyed that idea about the commercialization of sport. And I thought they got the balance, just to finish on what I like. I thought they got the balance really right between satire and just jokes, just gags, just making you laugh. Both of them are really good in it as well, because considering they're not really actors, like they're sort of comedians, voice actors, satirists, writers, but they're quite good in this. I mean, Trey Parker has a lot more emoting to do because he has much more of a journey to go, whereas Trey Parker is more like the foil, isn't he?
Matt Stone, yeah.
Sorry, what did I say? Matt Stone,
Trey. You said Trey first, but then you said Trey again.
Sorry, he's in it so much. Doubly good.
Because he's in it so much. Good. He's the main character.
But he has a lot more to do than Matt Stone in terms of an emotional sense. But they're both quite good in it, because considering they're not, they've not done much more, if any, live action stuff. But that's what I thought. So pleasant surprise for me. I'll be honest with you. It was.
And that in turn is a pleasant surprise for me.
Did you think I was going to absolutely hate this?
I did, yeah. Because I was like, well, I know he's not really into South Park. And for me, a lot of the jokes and a lot of the way the jokes are delivered in this is quite similar to South Park. And it's quite cartoony as well in the way that it's put together. Like, there's a lot of sort of little, like, side stories and, like, these sort of things that are going on that just remind me so much of a cartoon. So I liked a lot of the things that you've already mentioned there. I'll just sort of go through my list sort of as quickly as I can. But I do just generally really like it, right? The general consensus for me is that it's funny, it's fast, there's some well-constructed gags in there. It's got a great soundtrack, a surprisingly impressive cast, and a bunch of cameos, all helped, of course, by the fact that I just love Matt and Trey. So, like you said, I do think the concept is great. It's entertaining, it's energetic, it's unique in places, in that it's coming up with a new sport, and it's fast-paced, like any good sports film needs to be. And it is a great commentary on the corruption and greed of mainstream sports and pokes fun at that, but whilst also being self-aware about the fact that they've made this film to make money, because they touch on that a couple of times as well. The other thing as well
Quite
that I thought
self-aware,
about,
isn't it?
it is a little bit. And the other thing I thought as well when you were talking just then is that they do also mention the fact that, once, all this, if we don't make it national, or, if we strip it back down and we don't take it national, all this, and all the athletes can just go back to getting paid absolutely nothing. So it's kind of commenting on the two sides of it, isn't it? It's saying that, well, it's all in the commercialization of sport almost needs to happen to ensure that these athletes are getting paid a decent wage and getting paid what they're worth. But at the same time, when that becomes all it's about, it becomes something really vapid and quite dark, doesn't it? So it's almost like, where do you find the balance?
It's a real double-edged sword, because obviously everyone, the most followed sport in this country is football. And you'll get a lot of people saying things about the top level footballers, that they're paid 350 thousands a week, right? A lot of money, silly money, really. And that, I'm not making an argument for paying them that, but on the other hand, you've also got footballers just scraping a living, who are paid probably below the average salary. If you look at below, even I'd argue below the championship, they're still probably paid more than you or I. I don't know. You don't send me your pay slips anymore, but
I got told off for doing that, George.
But probably a lot less. I mean, you've only got to watch something like We Are Wrexham, which is the Ryan Reynolds, Rob McElhenney documentary. So in the early episodes of that, before and during their takeover, it covers some of the players who were there who were just sort of scraping a living, and they're not paid millions. They live in houses that look like normal houses, terraced houses, detached houses, or whatever you want. And they're not, they're not paid loads. I mean, one of my parents' friends is the manager of they're a semi-pro team, so they're in the football pyramid, but they're sort of below the conference, which is the last professional level. And he's a postman. But he's also the manager of this team. I won't name the team just in case, but he's also the manager of a. If you said the team to most football fans, they'd know it, right? But he's the manager of this team. But he's also a postman, and the reason he can afford to do being a postman and managing the team, because he does get paid a little bit for the team, but it's actually because his wife is very well off, so he can afford to essentially indulge into him what is almost a expansive hobby. So that's the other side of it. So yes, you've got your top level athletes, top level footballers being paid silly money, but also there is that lower level as well, which is what you're touching on there. So I think that is really interesting. And I know it's much more US centric, like we've said, but in this country, it's still a relevant argument, isn't it? That's the point.
Absolutely, yeah, just sports everywhere, really. I love the opening sequence. So it depicts this sort of fall from grace that has happened in sport, where obviously money has become the most important thing and the heart and soul of it has all seemed to have disappeared. And then it's quite funny, but whilst also being quite sincere, with a really lovely bit of well-written narration from someone called Stephen McHattie, whose face I recognised because I looked him up, but I didn't really know him. But I just really love that sort of opening monologue that he does. So I do find it, I find it funny. There's so many different types of humour going on here. You've got some great visual gags, some absurd humour, like the fact that it's free-range chicken night here at the game. And there is some gross out in there. There's some misunderstanding and misdirection and wordplay. And also just, like the massive throbbing cock. So, some props and costume gags as well.
A lot of misdirection.
And the Foley
in
artist.
A lot of misdirection.
Yeah, there is, which
There's
I
a lot
really
of
like.
Jenny McCarthy plays a character who's like the owner of she's the owner of the guy who helps them get BASEketball's team started, and she ended up sort of getting in with the bad guy, doesn't she? But every time she's introduced, it's like she's doing something highly sexual, and then as it pans back, it's just she's like hoovering, or like she's doing something
laying
really,
carpet,
really mundane,
buffing my lobby, things like that. And she's sucking the chrome off a doorknob at one point. That was the weirdest one. So I think it looks great. So the version I was watching wasn't great quality in itself and clearly hasn't been remastered, which is a shame. But in terms of the costume, the props and the sets, I thought that there was a lot going on. So there's quite a few, the best way I can describe it, and you probably know the actual name for stuff like this, but there's sort of like sketch-like comedy sequences that don't really have much to do with the narrative and don't propel the story along. But for me personally, these were really funny, and they were funny enough that in stalling the progression of the story, it didn't become frustrating or annoying. So the best one is when they arrive at the hospital after a BASEketball game, and Joey, who is a kid that Coop and Rima have been hanging out with through the Deep Dream Come True Foundation. So he's like had an operation, or he's quite unwell, and he's unconscious or something. So they rush to his bedside, and then what follows is just absolute chaos and slapstick, where they start messing with the machines that he's hooked up to keep him alive. They throw another patient off the bed. Coop decides that he needs to perform surgery all of a sudden. And it's like you're just getting bombarded with these over-the-top,
It's almost like
absurd...
clowning, isn't it, in places?
It is like that. It is like that.
Reminds me
it's
of
just so extreme.
Have you seen Airplane?
I have, but only once and quite some time ago.
So there's a bit in that where there's one of the air stewardesses is playing the guitar for a sick girl at the front of the plane, and she's very fit. She keeps knocking her morphine drip. So she plays the guitar, she keeps
that. Exactly
that. But obviously that's the same team behind that. So it's a very similar joke, but obviously ramped right up in terms of what it is they're doing.
Oh, that's funny, isn't it? Yeah, I'd never considered the similarities between the two.
Winning formula,
now that you mention it, Josh, it makes sense. There's also this bit where you see a made-up TV show called Roadkill that has attached a camera to the front of a car, and then you watch it run over these like really fake animals. That was just hilarious, and that really got a laugh out of me. I also feel like that there's a good amount of jokes in this that don't get explained. So they're either like background gags or subtle things that just happen. So they don't get explained, or no one in the film really comments on them, and then we move on. And I like that because it shows a level of effort going into something that you can't guarantee that the audience is going to see and appreciate. Like so often in ridiculous comedies like this, all the jokes are shoved sort of front and center of the screen with massive fucking red arrows going, look, here's a joke. Make sure you laugh at the joke that we made. Here's the joke
audience.
we did. And
You've
I feel like these guys did.
And a lot of
So
the
I really
best comedies,
appreciated that.
a lot of the best comedies do. If you look at like something like this, or even if you go to TV and you think of things that are sort of in the same vein as this, even like something like Community, you've got to like trust. You've got to trust your audience.
Love Community.
It's great, innit? It's banging.
Oh, it's so funny.
But last
it's
season
so
is just
funny.
weak. But
no, I don't count that. Like it doesn't count.
We'll see how the film pans out.
I know.
Anything else then? Anything else for you?
That was it from me. I tried to reel that off quickly, but yeah,
real big fish it off quickly.
Oh, and that was cool as well that they were there, and they're like one of my husband's favorite bands as well. So we had a great time. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed it, and I went into it a little bit concerned. I'll be honest, but with stuff like this,
so you went in concerned about how it aged and stuff.
I went in concerned a bit about how it aged and if I would actually enjoy it, or if it was just my teenage self because I was obsessed with Matt and Trey or whatever. But I was pleasantly surprised. I enjoyed it and you enjoyed it, which I am so buzzing about.
Okay then, so we'll move on to the section where we talk about things that we didn't like about BASEketball, or things that we would change about BASEketball. Now I went first with the likes, so it's only fair, Alice, because I'm not sure you're going to have loads. Let's hear them then. Is there anything you didn't like it? Because you went into this saying you were worried about its aging. So I'm guessing you hadn't watched it in a while.
I hadn't watched it in a while. No, I haven't watched it for some time.
So based on that then, was there anything, or was it just as good as it used to be?
I mean, to be honest, there wasn't anything that I didn't like per se, but there were certainly things that I could assess that maybe other people wouldn't like about it. So I can certainly see how some of the jokes could get repetitive, especially if you're not into that kind of humour. So Rima and Coop calling Squeak like a little bitch and a pussy, etc. They do this a lot, and especially in like the first 20 minutes or so of the film. And there's a few other gags that get a bit overdone as well. So I get that. From a technical point of view, some of the sound and action didn't quite match. So you'd be looking at someone who was like almost out of frame, or like there's a moment where Squeak is in the hot tub and then it sort of malfunctions and he spins round and round. And you hear certain words being said and you hear characters' voices, but their mouth movements don't add up at all. So there's just like a couple of errors in that department. I would have liked a little bit more from Matt Stone, really, with Rima. So in terms of his script, his performance, and his character development, like I think you do get a lot from Coop, so Trey, and you empathise with him in places, and you feel like he goes on a bit of a journey, but I don't think you get the same sort of impact from Rima.
I'd agree with that. He doesn't really have much of an arc, does he?
Not really, and he kind of feels a bit like the sidekick, which is fine, but I feel like I just wanted a little bit more from
and it's
him.
also sort of presented to you like they're co-leads, but they're not really.
Yeah,
You know,
not really.
it's very
It
much
feels
Trey
like
Parker,
Trey,
isn't it?
very much. Yeah.
They both not. Coop definitely has an arc in terms of his character development, whereas Rima, he sort of starts as an immature bellend and ends as a bit of an immature bellend, and a lot of that is where the comedy comes from, and that's part of the charm. But it's brought into contrast when you do get that character development from Coop, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So that was something that I would have been happy to maybe see a bit more work on. I would have liked some clear rules and boundaries when it comes to the psych outs, right? So for those who haven't seen the film, so when a player is about to make a shot into the basket, a player on the other team is allowed to distract them in some way, and this is called a psych out. So if you're literally allowed to do anything, which you seem to be able to do, then wouldn't you just always be pushing or tackling the thrower,
because
right?
You can touch them. It never says like
it seems like
you can't touch them.
Like
if it was you can do anything but not you can't actually physically touch them. That might make more sense, right? As to like what you can do, but actually, like you say, it's literally like, set them on fire, like whatever you want.
Yeah,
like
you can literally do anything from things like. So, like the tamer ones, which are literally just, I hear your sister's going out with Squeak. Or whack, like at one point, Rima like whacks him over the head with a plank of wood. And then obviously he's squirting what I guess is breast milk, what I guess is Rima's breast milk, squirting that into people's faces. So, again, I'm not looking for realism in crazy, absurd comedy, but I wouldn't, put a bit of, there's got to be some sort of rule there. You can't just be like, oh yeah, psych out, you can do whatever, smash into them, hurt them, spray things at them, cover them in stuff. Could have just done with a bit more about that.
Anything as simple as anything goes, but you can't physically touch them or any other person. Just something like that.
Or cover them in a substance. So it's got to be either through your words or actions that you do that only impact yourself.
A distraction, that's the whole thing, isn't it?
Exactly. Because Coop does one where he sort of pretends to cut his finger off, doesn't he? And then there's blood spurting from it. So that's fine because you're doing that to yourself. And then just finally, but you've sort of disproved this final point a little bit, which I'm happy about. Right, okay. But I had initially thought that if you don't like South Park or if you don't really know who Matt and Trey are, that I don't know if you would find this film enjoyable. But that is because of my personal experience. So a huge part of the enjoyment for me when I saw this for the first time was that I got to see those two in the flesh, basically.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if anyone else was in those two roles, how I would feel about it. Obviously, I'll never know. I can't answer that question for sure, but that is something that I considered. But the fact that you were able to enjoy it, even though you're not a huge fan of South Park, that does say a lot to me, and I'm pleased about that.
And yeah, absolutely. And they're not just your average co-leads either, because they're not, it's not a Will Ferrell, Mark Wahlberg film, is it? Do you know what I mean? It's a film where they very much have had a hand in. Obviously they didn't have the original idea, but they obviously had a big hand in the execution, the jokes, the tone, all that sort of stuff. So they go hand in hand. So no, I mean, I did enjoy it. I'm not a big fan of South Park. Having said that, one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of South Park is probably the style and execution of it I find irritating. So maybe that's one of the things, is because it's not in that style. Because like I said, I can very much appreciate them too as comedians and writers and satirists and all that. I do like Team America. I just don't love it.
Yeah. All right, I won't pick it. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's underrated, and it's not underseen.
Could be a classic. Well regarded, if we're going for like 20 years, then it could be a classic.
America, fuck yeah! I mean, that's iconic. Right? Go on, you lay it on me, Josh.
Okay, so there isn't loads for me. There is some stuff.
Okay.
I would probably argue that there's some prior knowledge needed to understand all of the jokes, particularly the more American-specific, American-centric stuff. So I can imagine I knew a bit, you knew a bit, but I'd imagine you'd have to have a bit more knowledge around. I don't know if you get the message and a lot of the jokes around the commercialization of sport if you were going into this not knowing about it.
Okay.
There was some issue with the dating of the film, not as much as I thought. So my point earlier when I said, when the first 10 minutes of this film, I was like, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be, right? And this is not, let me be clear as well, this is not specific to this film, this is specific to the time period, but one of the first lines is they go to a house party of a girl, and Rima says, but I really want to fuck her. And I was like, oh, right, late 90s, early 90s. Like that's how women were written. That's how women were written about. That's how dialogue in films was. So that's not specific to this film.
But it is satire as well.
That's
and
true.
That's the huge difference, isn't it? Like, because I was thinking, because there were moments of it that I was like, oh, this is a little bit American Pie for me. This is a bit 40 Days and 40 Nights. But the whole thing is taking the piss out of those things.
Yes, it is.
And that's the way that you sort of get away with it, if you like.
That's true. Yeah, it is. So I suppose that element of it, yes, on one hand it's satire, but on the other hand, I think it's probably just a little bit a victim of its time, because I think if you made this now, that wouldn't be in it. You'd find another way to do it, or you'd make it more obvious that these characters are a bit thick.
Dick
Yeah,
bags.
do you know what I mean? I do think there's an element, particularly with Rima's character, where I could have done with the leads being a little bit more likable, and that comes back to your point, which is that Coop has an arc, and by the end you like Coop. You know, he has this really interesting subplot where not only is this a satire on sport, but it makes a point about wider capitalism and commercialization, right? Where there's a whole bit with sports clothing in Calcutta and being made by children, right? Which is still happening today. Absolutely deplorable. Not just sports clothing, but the fashion industry in general. I'm not going to speak on it any further. I'm not an expert, but we know it's happening. It's it's common knowledge that it's happening. And he goes over and he sorts it out, and that's a really interesting. That's almost like his arc of like, oh, he's learned that it's this. Whereas Rima starts off with Coop, then actually completely buys into the money side of things and never really develops past that. And so I sort of wonder what the point of his character was. So because he wasn't more likable, I struggled to get on board with him, but it wasn't a huge issue. Do you know what I mean? It was like, I'm sort of looking for stuff. And that is, maybe that's the point, is that it's trying to show two sides of the coin of like, if you take the 30 feels it's a silver or you don't, or whatever.
Yeah, maybe.
And then, and one more thing, and I've already touched on it a little bit, is the rules of the sport. Because they really quickly show you, but until the end, when you get a wide shot of the field and you see the baseball, oh my god, what was pitch? Yeah, pitch, bases. That's the word I'm looking for. Where you run around the circle. I was like, I don't understand how this isn't just basketball. I know what I mean is that is shooting, free throwing. But at the end, you see that it is baseball as well. But I could have done with a little bit more about explaining it. But also I understand that you could do it that way and it could be completely on the nose. So, but that's it from me. Plenty to like in there. And not that much to dislike, just a little bit really.
Excellent. I'm so pleased.
Okay then, so let's move on to talking about the critical reception then. I have not seen the critical reception, but you think it's underrated, but you also quite like the film. So I would say, I can imagine the critics really hating this, but the audience quite liking it. So I reckon it probably balances out. So I reckon we're looking at a 6 overall, a rough 6. What would I give it? Probably I think it's a solid 7. Maybe mid 6s to 7. Like it's you know,
I think
it's decent. It's not for me. It's not really doing anything new, but it's, you know, it's watchable. It's decent. It's funny. I laughed at it.
It's watchable. Yeah, there you go, listeners.
What every filmmaker wants to hear. It's watchable. So go on, lay it on me then.
So over on IMDb at the time of recording, it gets 6.5.
Okay.
So kind of pretty much what you said. And then over on Rotten Tomatoes, so the audience give it 74%.
Right.
So the audience are keen. And then the critics gave it 41%. And it was that 41 that really kicked me in the shins. I was like, it's nowhere near
that's
that
harsh.
bad, in my opinion. Yeah, and a lot of the criticisms were that they just didn't find it funny, that, you know, it falls flat, that it doesn't matter how relentless your jokes are, if this shit, then it doesn't work, and it was all that sort of thing. So obviously the critics just didn't find it funny, and because it is a comedy, first and foremost, if you don't find it funny, then that is the end for you, isn't it? And you're not going to enjoy it.
It is, but we've touched on this before, even last week with Ace Ventura, that a lot of critics tend to favour the higher brow of the comedies, but I'd say Ace Ventura is probably slightly more immature than this in one sense, but then this is probably slightly more gross out than Ace Ventura in some senses as well. So I can see, I would not expect the critics to like this. And you've got to question. It's difficult with comedy. It's so subjective, isn't it? It's so subjective, but that's harsh. 41% is harsh for me. What about you?
I mean, definitely, yeah. So I think that is underrated with that 41% for sure. So do you think it's underrated too?
So that averages out at roughly like 60%, 6 out of 10, doesn't it? So yeah. I'm going to say underrated. Do we know what it did at the box office in terms of underseen?
So they spent something like 35 to 40 mil on it. And then the only record for the box office I could find was about 8 million.
Yeah, so
not great.
That's not great.
Not great.
No. For me, overall, I think it's underrated. If you like Airplane, if you like Dodgeball, it's sort of a mix of those two things, really.
I like Dodgeball.
Yeah, great mix of comedy. Definitely, if you like those sorts of films, I think it is for you, and I think it's definitely underrated. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm pleased with that. Well, there we go then. BASEketball, underrated and underseen. I'm so surprised, pleasantly surprised. I really didn't think this was going to be for you, but there we go.
Well, some of us are more open-minded than other people who don't like Ace Ventura, but whatever.
I know. I'm so sorry about that. But there we go. I got to be true to myself, you know. But anyway, this is my favourite time of the week. Josh, what are we going to be watching next week?
I'm torn. So this will be the last of our choices for January because hopefully we'll have a guest.
Okay.
And we're doing the feel-good thing, right? We're trying to pick films to uplift you. So I got two choices in my head, right? And I can't pick between them, so I'm going to put it to you. Right, which we've never done before. We've never done before.
Oh, this is exciting! I get to choose. Yay.
So my two choices are
a
film called In and Out and a film called Blockers. Have you seen either of those?
I don't think I have. In and Out, are you saying?
Yeah, like in ampersand out.
Okay.
Or Blockers.
And Blockers, I'm nearly 100% certain I've seen a thumbnail for Blockers. Is that short for cock blockers or something?
Maybe.
Yeah, oh, interesting.
Maybe.
In and out, or Blockers. Ooh, I'm going to say, I think you should pick Blockers.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I'm interested.
Okay, well, in that case, join us next week where we're going to be talking about Blockers.
But put In and Out on the list for later.
In and Out's on the list. In and Out is on the list for later. So join us next week when we're going to be talking about Blockers. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us, it's filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're on all the social medias. If you just search for Just Films and That, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. We're on Patreon as well. Search for Just Films and That on Patreon. There's loads of extra bonus content you get there. And it's not that much money, so hopefully we can get you a little bit of something extra and you can support the podcast, and any support is, of course, massively appreciated by us. And it really is. And I'll tell you what else, Alice, we're on the television as well.
We are indeed. We are on the local TV network every Friday from 6 p.m. So if you live in Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Liverpool, or the northeast of England, you can find us on Channel 7 on Freeview. Or if you live in North Wales or South Wales, you can find us on Channel 8 on Freeview. That is every Friday from 6 p.m. Me and Josh talking about all the best unseen and underrated films.
Yes, well, all that remains to be said is thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week when we're going to be talking about Blockers. Interested to know how this is going to go. It's goodbye from moi. Cheerio.
Bye.